Recording in progress.
All right, it is 5:09. We will call the Joint Utility and Public Works meeting to order. We have a quorum for both commission and committee. Agenda was properly posted, so we'll move to number 3, public appearances, the public's opportunity to speak. Is there anyone in the room or online who would like to speak? Not seeing any, so we can move to number 4, discuss and consider the minutes from the Public Works Properties Sustainability Committee meeting from July 8th, 2026.
I move approval of the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second from Public Works. Any further discussion? Otherwise, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? And we'll move to number 5, presentation by Strand Associates on the stormwater utility feasibility study.
So I was coming out of the last joint meeting we had in June about the stormwater quality management report plan. I think it was a plan, not a report. We have Dan Johnstone and Josh Straka. You guys want to put John, the name tag down in front of you because you guys aren't Ellers. Thanks. From Strand Associates here to give the presentation on the results of the stormwater feasibility study for the utility. Let you guys go ahead and go over.
Lisa, Dan's going to try to share. Is that okay? Yep. Okay. And everybody, this is Dan Johnstone. So he's a stormwater engineer at our firm. He's going to do the majority of the talking. I am here for moral support. So, but I can answer questions too. I'll let you take it away, Dan.
Alrighty, hello again. Today we'll be talking about the stormwater utility study that we did, just kind of piggybacking off the stormwater quality management plan update that I last presented on a couple months ago. So we're going to first kind of talk through, I'll hide that a little bit, the stormwater planning overview, what we did previously, where it's kind of led to now, why we need the stormwater utility, and then talk about kind of the permit deficiencies compared to nearby communities. So what did the last report tell us, and how does it compare to other municipalities in the area? We'll talk about some of the governing ordinances that are kind of pushing the village towards needing these compliance options. Give a quick ordinance or a stormwater utility overview. So kind of what are we looking at in general, and then kind of talking about the village development shifts historically and kind of what we're seeing. Then we'll talk through the nearby stormwater utility and kind of the comparison between different municipalities and kind of show where we are at, where we're proposing to be at compared to other municipalities in Dane County. Talk about the credit policies that could be implemented, and then also talk through the ERU implementation options. Alrighty, so planning overview. A couple months ago I came in and presented about the village's stormwater quality management plan update. That's required under their MS4 permit. It kind of showed where the village is at now in terms of water quality treatment in the lakes and streams and all the different areas around the village, and then where the village needs to get to in order to be in permit compliance. So it also identified kind of how to get there, and one of the key takeaways was that development paves the way. It's kind of the most cost-effective kind of move forward. So as development happens, stormwater ponds get installed. Those then help the village towards that final compliance. So that's where we're at now. Then there needs to be a way to fund potential future stormwater work, and that's where the stormwater utility comes in, and that's where the study comes in. So I just wanted to point out this kind of figure here real quick. What we did throughout the entire village was a impervious-pervious delineation. So everywhere there's impervious area, that's the yellow. Everywhere there's green, that's the pervious areas on this map. And we'll dive into this a bit more, but I just wanted to kind of let you know ahead of time that the yellows are impervious, the greens are pervious. So stormwater permit deficiencies compared to the nearby communities. This is mostly regarding Yahara Winds buy-in, which I touched upon briefly last time. The village currently buys in at $12,200 a year. With the new update that's been almost approved by the DNR, we're waiting on a couple last quick steps. It'll drop down to $9,200 a year. But as you can see, there's a wide range of buy-ins. So the city of Madison's sitting at $779,000 annually. So the $12,000 and $9,000 a year annually is quite a bit different than that. And you can see a lot of the communities are quite a bit bigger. There's quite a bit more of a gap. So the village is doing well, but this buy-in option is very cost-effective and a great path forward. And as development happens, your buy-in comes down. That's kind of what these updates do. So some of the governing ordinances that kind of drive stormwater in general, and then the permit compliance. So you have the Dane County ordinance, and that's the village ordinance and the Dane County ordinance are very close to each other. Typically, on the stormwater side, they're trying to mirror each other. Dane County is much more stringent than the DNR in some situations, so they have to meet at least Dane County requirements, and the village follows behind that. So the Dane County Erosion Control and Stormwater Management Ordinance was effective August 22nd, 2002. There was a brief update in 2006 regarding some infiltration and shoreline ordinance modifications, but since then, the ordinance has remained essentially untouched. The significant driver in today's day and age is the Rock River TMDL, which was issued in September 28th, 2011. That is essentially what is causing most of the costs for communities in the area, in regards to stormwater at least. And being in compliance with the Rock River TMDL is difficult, and that's where this Yahara Winds buy-in comes in. So that's where we're at. That's where the village is at today. How do we pay for potential projects in the future? So that's where the stormwater utility comes in. So as I mentioned, we did a impervious delineation where the yellow areas are impervious, the green areas are pervious, and the utility only covers what's outside of the right-of-way. So the right-of-way, the sidewalks, the street, all of that is considered kind of part of the drainage system and isn't kind of charged twice. So to explain kind of one of the biggest topics is the equivalent runoff unit, or the ERU, which we'll be referencing a lot. It's essentially what one average residential parcel has for impervious area. So there's 1,846 residential parcels in the village. There's 7,503,220 square feet of impervious area in those parcels. So you divide the two, and you get 4,065 square feet of impervious area per parcel. That's one ERU. So you can take that, and you can look at it across all the other different parcels across the village. So a large commercial site might have a lot more than that. It might have 50 ERUs. So it's 50 times that 4,065 square feet of impervious area. And one of the kind of key tables that was put together in the report is this kind of bar graph on the left-hand side. It compares how different parcel types, land uses are billed between a tax-based system and a stormwater utility-based system. The numbers really aren't that important. I think the only one, and there's like two that aren't based on a zero scale graph, but the single-family residential shows a decrease. The commercial sites and the medical sites show an increase. The tax-exempt sites, which wouldn't have any tax income for the village for stormwater projects, now has a portion to pay. Multifamily residential sites would typically come down. Large industrial sites and medium industrial sites would go up under this new rule. So it's essentially saying make sure that everyone's paying fairly for how much impervious area they have. So a big site that generates a lot of runoff, you want to make sure they are paying more, not based on taxes, but based on their actual runoff generation. And that's what this does.
So I'm just gonna have you back up real quick.
Yeah.
Because this is where, so we held in-person feedback session with residents. One of the concerns here was, our goal is to obviously apply and come up with the best unit of applying who should be paying for what. And so one of the comments that was presented was, my house, based off of the 4,600 whatever square feet, is really like a 0.7 ERU, and I know this person who has, let's say 8,000 square foot of impervious area, and under this method, it would still be 1 ERU for each of those property under what is being presented. So we worked back and forth a little bit on what do communities do to kind of combat this and ensure fairness. And so we do have a calculation of precise decimals, to 3 decimal places out. There's pros and cons to using the precise decimal instead of using a rounded ERU. If we use a precise decimal approach, I'll describe this as like halfway between a tiered approach and a simplified rounded ERU. So we will have administrative challenge. If we don't use the 1 ERU for a household, people will come in and say, well, I actually measured 4,800. Like, this needs to be adjusted by 100th or 1,000th decimal place. And so, this is something that when we talked about, I felt like it definitely warrant, as a staff member, I didn't want to ultimately be making that decision. I want this committee and commission to be aware that it is an option, that we do not have to do the rounded figure, that we could, for instance, because when I was looking at the makeup, we have anywhere between 0.7 ERUs and 1.8 ERUs. And to me, for residential units, this really doesn't have an impact on any other class. This is hyper focused on single family homes. And so for me, I think if the board and this commission and committee feel like it's important, we certainly have the capability of doing the decimals, and not out to the 3 decimals. We would probably go to 1 decimal place. But just knowing that when they're doing this modeling, they didn't go out to every property and take a ruler. A lot of this stuff was done through GIS. So sometimes there's legitimate discrepancy. Like, let's just say there's a really dark area, like there's a tall building in a dark area. That shadow that's cast may have been accidentally identified as an additional or impervious area, even though it wasn't. So as part of the implementation steps, we're going to go through the listing that we have and make sure in general these make sense. But when we say fairness, the rounded 1 ERU isn't necessarily unfair. It's meeting somewhere in between. So as staff, we're not pushing for one method or the other. We just want to know what you have available and what the pros and cons are to those. From an administrative perspective, if we go through and we do the more precise ERU, my recommendation through this process is the Utility Commission roughly every 10 years is going to be updating the master plan. We would engage Strand then to actually update all the ERUs. Again, do another analysis, we'll compare it to what we have, and then we would update obviously system-wide. How a more precise unit would work from a developer perspective, as people pull permits for the system, we could have our building inspection report back what the impervious area is of the property and calculate, because we have the denominator where we can calculate what the ERU is to that more specific level. But again, just wanting to make sure the commission and committee is aware that it's not overwhelmingly more administrative burden, but there is an administrative side to using that more precise method. Additionally, I think we would be, out of all the communities listed, I believe Monona does a similar approach to this, but most communities, again, just being transparent, stick with the rounded unit. And I'm really fighting myself back and forth on this, on what is the right, most equitable method to doing this. These are the things that keep me up at night. So when we're looking at this graph, the only thing else I want to add is, and I sent some communication out to the commission and committee. So when we're looking at the tax exempt category, also you want to keep in mind tax reduced. So there's some properties that may be for affordable housing or other related purposes. They might have their tax assessment reduced, but that doesn't necessarily reduce their impervious area. So when we're talking about equitableness on the runoff units that are created for properties, this helps kind of align the ERU unit to be more in alignment with what is actually produced in that property because of the variability on how different properties can be assessed. Additionally, when the village creates a tax incremental financing district, any increase in assessment in equalized value, I want to make sure I'm using the right terms for that, is that increment has to stay within that TID district until the closure of the TID. And so a lot of the times when we're talking about kind of cost recovery and kind of making sure that every property is paying for what they're creating, yes, we do require development to put stormwater facility in, and that would offset whatever their bill is, when we start talking about credit policy. But if under the utility method, just like they would get a water and sewer bill on day one, they would now be getting a stormwater bill on day one. So that allows that immediate impact of the facility or development to be happening to immediately start contributing to the ongoing operating cost. And I think that's when we look at this as more equitable, as in our sense, it kind of makes sense from a logical perspective. And that's truly why you see the single family and multifamily, the cost decrease so substantially compared to under an assessment model. And I guess, and furthermore, to reiterate, this is a funding mechanism only. We're not making any operating decisions on the creation or non-creation of a stormwater utility. This is how are we gonna pay the expenses that are coming. And so making sure that we're taking a look at how those costs are generated and assigning it to, again, this methodology of an equivalent runoff unit. And so I apologize for taking a more extended. We will allow questions.
I was just going to say, can we take a break and see if anybody has any questions?
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Does anybody have any questions about this?
I have one. You mentioned like a shadow might be misidentified as permeable surface. Is there, like, how accurate can you be sure that these things aren't? Like, what if somebody's got a huge tree with a concrete pad underneath that you can't see from a sky view or something?
Right. So I actually was going to get to this a bit later. We can talk about this now. So this is a very zoomed in area of 3 random residential houses that I just happened to choose. Once again, yellow is impervious, green is pervious. You can see mainly on kind of the second house here, there is some of this kind of back walk area was picked up, but not all of it. And you can see the same thing over here. This shadow wasn't always picked up. And to give you a background on like what was done for this is, in this day and age, there's very crisp aerials that you can go in and train ArcGIS to look for different, it's called fourth band, but it's essentially just like different signatures coming off the land when they shoot the aerial. And that can be pervious or impervious. So you kind of teach the program to look at that. And then you can do a lot of this stuff for a lot cheaper. Otherwise, how they used to do it was they'd have some poor intern spend their entire summer tracing. So this area becomes a lot more cost effective. and gets very close to accurate. The reason why we don't spend a lot of time coming in and clean up every one of these little things is the typical approach is to just average everything out, right? So these little bits here and there between one parcel and another don't really matter when you average 1,000 parcels together. They're all going to be billed roughly the same.
If you stick with the method of
If you stick with the
one
method.
ERU for all
Exactly.
single-family homes.
And that's the typical, that's how we typically set this up.
Yeah, that's kind of the starting point, I think, to it, and that's
Right.
Cameron getting onto it, the side tangent of, do we want to go a little further?
Right.
But you get into the weeds.
Yes.
And you get into maybe more arguments, and you have to do more detail, and you get at people pointing at each other when people make improvements on their house. In between even this, that becomes even more administrative. So, I mean, it's just something to think about, as part of that.
Yeah, I guess one of my concerns would be there's no disincentive to pave your entire property if you're paying the same as your neighbor who's putting in green infrastructure all over the place to do a better job. On the same hand, if somebody were to come in with a development that had small attainable single-family homes on small lots, they're going to pay the exact same as the people that are buying double lots and putting in giant homes on them and having significant more impact on the runoff. And they're paying the same. So,
that's-
I mean, I
yeah.
understand exactly where we're
Yep.
coming from
Yep.
on the administrative cost. I feel like technology is in our court, we have the ability, and it's only gonna get better, to get this as accurate as we can. And if we do this every 5 years that it's flown and we check it,
Every
and
other,
we
yeah. I mean, yeah, I think
make our adjustments at that point,
and I think to remind, like, these imaging's at a point in time. So like we're gonna have some work in between when the imaging is done and like when new construction and other things. And so what you'll find is this data gets better and better every year after implementation. You continue to do more and more refinement and cleanup. But like to your point with the disincentivizing concrete, I think that's what we want to do because stormwater requirements aren't getting less. And so as we continue and have the more robust, more 100-year flood instances that we have to have infrastructure to accommodate, that's really the goal here is we want to reduce impervious area because all the infrastructure that we had in place in 1995 would not meet what our current stormwater requirement is. And that's why it's kind of unique in this aspect that new development is actually helping because they're built to the current standard, catch us up from a credit perspective from older development that was done on a previous standard. And so that's why, when we looked at this with the precise decimal, I could do it. I just wanted to make sure that the council and the committee was aware of that. If we move forward with this, if the village board moves forward with this, realize that this is one of many things that we need to do before the end of the year. So my biggest ask of both the utility commission and the village board is I need the rest of the time between the end of the year, between then and the end of the year to implement this. We need to go out, we need to verify parcels that we have questions on. We need to go through our building permits and make sure that this is ready to go. Because the last thing we want to do is kick this off till November, and all of a sudden we have a month to try to make this work.
I understand. I just want to make sure, we're asking a lot of our residents if we're imposing this, and I want to make sure we get it right before we implement it.
And there is one other approach, I think, to that as well that we aren't talking about, maybe quite, and that's more of the tiered approach that I think
Yeah.
Dan might bring up too, where you find, is it small, medium, large, or whatever for a residential parcel. So you may not get it exact, but you may fall in a different bucket. Based on parcel size. That's a different way to kind of look at it as well.
So I'll just note, if you have the data that precise, I'm sure you can map it and it fits a Gaussian distribution, right? Where you have most people in the middle and then you have the extreme edges, right?
Right.
And the extreme edges is what we're gonna have trouble with, right? Because that's what you're trying to avoid. So if you know that, I mean, you can essentially split it up into 3 buckets. You have the high and the low, and then you have the bulk, 66% of the residents essentially in the same middle bucket, and then you're just avoiding the extremes. You're still going to have the edges, the people who are on the high versus the mid or something like that. There's always going to be cases like that, but it's a little bit maybe of a middle ground where we are segmenting this, but we don't need to go into like fine detail, right? Most residents are going to be in the middle bucket where they should be. Just one option if the data does map that way.
Okay, I agree. Okay, so we'll breeze through some of this. This has kind of already been talked about, but there's been residential shifts, or there's been a shift from residential towards commercial throughout the village, kind of since 2000 to 2026, and it's just kind of focusing on making sure everyone pays their fair share. Across Dane County, these are the communities that have stormwater utilities. The village's proposed dollars per ERU per month is $890. You can see that falls kind of roughly in the middle. And one thing I wanted to note here is that you'll see some of these municipalities are quite a bit lower, which you wouldn't necessarily expect based on size. But what happens is a lot of these get implemented once and then never updated. So those numbers might have been great for them 15 years ago, 20 years ago when it was implemented, but they've never just done any updates to it since. So if they were to update it to what their current needs are, those values might jump quite a bit higher. And some of the newer ones, or the ones City of Sun Prairie just did an update, and you can tell that they've jumped quite a bit. So that's kind of where we're doing an update now, or we could be starting now, and we're still in the middle. And a lot of these other communities have been out there for a while, and they may jump in the future.
Yeah, and furthermore to that, we're kind of fighting ourselves here on 2 ways. We're showing a projected 2027 rate. All the other comparables on here are what the rates are now. So, for example, I'm aware of a possible increase in Verona, Monona, Middleton will be the same. Stoughton just did a bigger increase. But that's the kind of hard part on doing some of this benchmarking is we don't know what the projected increases are on these. But we feel and part of what went into this was, okay, if we want this to be self-sustaining, minimize the requirement to take out debt to fund projects, so essentially try to cash fund every capital improvement, every major dredging, this is what that rate would be. We can certainly have a reduced rate if we know that one day we're going to have to jump this up by $4 or $5 because we had to take out debt to fund a capital improvement, and then the new rate would then help us with the debt service on the payment that had to do the improvement. So right now that rate is self-sustaining. This is assuming that every 5 years we're going to be able to replace our street sweeper using cash. Every 4 years we're doing $1 million worth of dredging on our various ponds, and being able to all cash fund those incentives instead of relying on having to add a rate of return like we were just talking about in the last presentation at Utility Commission. We don't have a rate of return built into our rates because we don't have an intention right now on taking out debt for these improvements. And so this really allows us to minimize future costs. I understand that there's sensitivity at the 890, but understanding that was part of the goal in that rate is that number can certainly be less, but there's things that are going to have to be sacrificed as part of that.
And the only other thing I want to point out is that Madison and Monona use tiered systems. Madison reports on average at $1271 a month, and Monona doesn't post their average. But we'll talk about the tiered system in just a second. So stormwater utility credits, typically how credits are done for single-family residential properties is it's a one-time credit. If you have a stormwater or stormwater BMP, so a rain barrel or a rain garden, something like that, it's a one-time credit. The reason why this isn't annual is that it's very hard to administer to make sure someone doesn't get rid of their rain barrel and then is still taking the credit. So you could see someone trying to, I'm going to buy it once and then I'm just going to get rid of it, and then they get that credit for the rest of their time there. So that's why it's kind of set up as a one-time credit. It'd be extra administration if you wanted to do an annual credit. All other land uses are based on annual credits, and it's essentially what stormwater infrastructure they have on site. So if it's kind of broken up here, but it's typically a maximum of 50% of their utility bill. It can be cut in half by having these different things that give them a credit. So if they have a brand new state-of-the-art infiltration basin that meets all the standards, well, yes, there's a lot of impervious area there, but it's being treated. So it's not having as much of an impact on the village's infrastructure as another community or another parcel that has no treatment. So that's the idea behind these credits.
So what if you own a rain barrel but it's not connected?
So Chris, if
That's not a rain
just,
barrel.
just joking.
So Chris, if we step back, with the rain barrel program, what I would recommend, and I know it's a more administrative work, I would like residents to have an annual benefit. Right. So what we would ultimately do from an administrative perspective is we would pick a sample every year, and we would sample to make sure the residents that have credits have it. And so like if we find in our sample of 30, they're claiming to have it, and there's 5 that don't, that may result in statistically needing to do more. But that's you're never going to do all 200 people that are claiming the credit. But I think to align with conservation, it would make sense to give us to incentivize this. So if we would go out and say we're going to now inspect this, and all of a sudden we see that yours isn't connected, we would politely knock on the door and say, hey, we notice you have this credit. In order to continue to have this credit, you need to put this in. I will say this is only residential, the storm barrel. For commercial, if any credits we give, we would require them to send something to us that they're maintaining compliant, maintaining dredging requirements. Yeah, you got it.
Essentially, every commercial site that has a stormwater infrastructure has a maintenance plan and a maintenance agreement. So right now, we would actually require all of those property owners to have a professional engineer. They would hire a third party to come out, do their check, make sure that all of their basin fancy things that are above what I can explain are meeting actual infiltration requirements. Now, the one thing to note is like Heyday, that's being built. There's a pond there. That pond is an outlot for the village. So that is separate, and that is one of our ponds. But if you look at Amazon's ponds that are on their site, those are all Amazon's ponds, so then they would get a credit. So it all depends on who owns the property as well.
The fee of $890 you have on here, is that from the previous slide, is that assuming no credits are given?
Yes.
So the actual fee, if you want to pay for this, is going to be much higher? Or you said $890 is what we'd be able to pay for cash for improvements, right?
Sorry.
A month. That'd be like $890 a month. It'd be like, that would be your bill amount.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm saying if we give now half the village 25% credits, we're not able to pay for anything in cash, correct?
We took the original number and factored in credits. So normally they would present that in that faction. We took a reduction of the overall estimated ERU, made sure we could still recover, and we're not going to be spot on, but we're going to be close. So good.
See is about 5% of all people who are eligible for a credit actually apply for the credit. So just because they have the basin that they could get that credit doesn't mean they necessarily are like savvy enough or have the will to go through the administrative process to get the credit. So it's typically only about 5%. Alrighty, so we've kind of gotten to this slide already. But yeah, there's 3 residential approaches. There's the standard approach, everyone gets 1 ERU. There's the tiered approach, the small, medium, large. And then there's the site-specific approach. Everyone is based on their own impervious area. This is, I guess, kind of like the biggest decision that I think will need to still be made. And it all comes down to equitability versus kind of administrative cost. So most, like we said, most communities do the 1 ERU just to keep the administrative cost low. But what I've shown on this graph on the bottom right-hand corner is kind of a breakdown of different residential, well, it's all land use types, but a couple of the key ones is that there is a large amount of medium density, which is kind of like the average size home parcel. There's a decent amount of, the blue bottom center of the graph. Then the kind of upper edge is this orange, which is a suburban residential, which is like a quite large parcel. There's also a low density, which is between the suburban and medium density. And then one thing I did want to note is that the high density, the really tight parcels, there's not very many of them. So you tend to lean towards a kind of average size parcel to larger. Most of the communities that choose to approach a tiered approach are communities that have a huge discrepancy between different parcels. So City of Monona has all of those mansions directly on the lake. And then 4 blocks away have high density residential packed in there. That's where you have someone, you don't want the person who makes millions of dollars every year to be paying the same as someone who is just less fortunate than they are. That's where that tiered approach comes in typically. We'll let the village decide how they want to approach it, but that's when it's typically seen, is when there's a huge discrepancy between them. So that's kind of the majority of the background and the stormwater utility. The final kind of next steps are deciding on an ERU billing method, finalizing the credit policy that the village would like to implement, compiling stormwater utility implementation documents, and then adopting an ordinance in the beginning of administration. And then I also had this one slide that I pulled up earlier that just showed the the close up houses.
So actually, what are we here to do tonight is kind of the next question. So ultimately, this is a village board decision. And so this is to provide a recommendation on, based off of Public Works, who's currently managing this, and Utility Commission, which is going to be the proposed entity that would be operating it. If you are recommending moving forward, great. But then what would you like to see as far as ERU? If you have a preferred approach, we would like to know that. If village board and this body, approve to move forward, we would ultimately come back with a post-implementation plan. And so kind of what that looks like on our side, additional public information meetings, obviously budget adoption, credit policy, utility commission training and resources, ordinance revisions, chamber presentation, getting the word out. Because the last thing we want this to be is a shock to residents. We want to know, especially the people who are on fixed incomes, we want to make sure that they know what their tax bill is going to be and what their average estimate is going to be for their utility bills, because we understand there are people out there that are month to month managing dollars and pennies. And so having that post-implementation kind of plan, if we move forward with this, it is really important, and making sure we get that messaging out. I am open to do it in as many meetings in as many ways that we want. So if this commission and committee wants to see certain types of post-implementation communication, certainly recommend it. We have roughly $15,000 of what I call post-implementation budget. So that really covers all the changes that we're going to need to do. To be honest, the ordinances that have to change for the stormwater utility are areas of our ordinance that need an update anyways. So we're like, okay, let's just tackle this both at once. And then there's some money in there. We are not recommending doing a formal cash flow analysis, which is what we just did for water and sewer, because we feel like the information that we've gathered year one is really good and really was encompassed in their management plan study and feasibility study. So that will save us about $6,000 that we weren't expecting to have as additional communication or other resources, or we just don't spend it. I'm perfectly fine with that. So I guess I will move it to Chris or whoever's chairing the meeting, and we can let the questions start.
So a question about the tiered approach. Does it have to be 3 tiers to start with, or can you start with 2? And because right now we don't have a whole lot of small lot residential, but it's something we've talked about a lot at the ad hoc housing chapter update committee, starting to do that. So we might have some in the future. So is there a way to start with, just medium and large, and then shift it to small, medium, large in the future?
Yes. I mean, it's completely up to the village and how they want to pursue this, but there's no one like dictating how these are implemented. I mean, there are, but the extra tiers isn't like a bad thing. So if someone goes to 2 tiers compared to 1, people are going to be happy. That's not like, you don't have to do 3, you don't have to do 4. You can do it however many
Okay.
you want. Yeah.
Any other questions, concerns? Go ahead, Mike.
I guess I have a question. I'm in favor of moving this forward, but there just seems to be so many details to work out. How do we do that?
So the details that staff don't feel comfortable making the decision is the approach on the ERU. So once that's determined by an elected body, what we would do is that wouldn't really change the ERU price point, because we'd still ultimately bring a budget forward. And so while the feasibility plan may say 890, if the actual amount is less than that, everybody in this room is going to be happy. We wouldn't propose anything higher than that. But because there's so much legwork that we need to do, it's on Monday, if this is moved forward, it would be that the board would approve the creation of a utility, and then we would move towards implementation as of January 1, 2027, and complete all the compliance and regulatory steps between now and then.
So are you looking for just a flat recommendation to go with the stormwater utility, or do you want a recommendation from us tonight about the ERUs?
Both. I want to know, is this funding mechanism something that this committee and commission is in favor? And I want to know if you guys have any specific approach on one of the approaches on how the ERUs are calculated. And then if you have further, we'll bring likely we're going to want to get, regardless, Public Works and sustainability on the credit policy, because there's some sustainability stuff in there. So that might be a couple committee and commissions being involved in the development of those policies. But we would want any feedback you're willing, and so then what I'll do after this meeting is I'll summarize it, get it into the board packet for Monday, and say this is what was discussed, for your consideration. So if we want to start with like maybe a general consensus, is this something from a recommendation perspective that this body is interested in moving forward with?
Well, before we get to that, I have a substantial amount of questions.
Love it.
I thank you guys for your time putting forth a lot of this information and trying to compile a tremendous amount of information that we can attempt to utilize to make a decision here. I had a fair amount, more than any other thing that I can remember, neighbors, people reaching out to me, asking what this is, how does it impact me, and why is it necessary? I have concerns because I have seen several people in the last couple months that have chose to move due to what they feel are excessive costs for living within the village. And I just want to make sure if this is moving forward that we get this right, because it's going to have an impact, like you alluded to earlier. So my first question is, based on $890 per ERU, what's the annual income?
So that would be $106.80 as opposed to $120 under the levy approach.
what's the total financial income per year that we would have in this bucket?
Oh, that was 700, a little over 700,000.
Do we feel that, I mean, I guess that's based on us spending X on dredging a year and X on capital equipment? Is there a staff position that's involved at all, or is it just additional staff time? I guess I don't want every single penny that goes into that 700, but what is that composed of?
Certainly, and I'm gonna kind of pull up a working document, so kind of work through here. I think a key reminder here is any cost that's currently going towards stormwater in the general fund is being pulled out of the general fund completely. So we're not duplicating cost and being moved into stormwater. So like, for example, like a public works technician, roughly 5% of their time is dedicated to stormwater. So those are the kind of things that would come out of being general funded or levy funded into the capital bucket. Let me just.
So Cameron, what's currently on the levy for stormwater?
So it is a little misleading from an operating perspective because there's some debt. There was some final debt service related stuff related to improvements. So currently, again, not changing any operations. We were estimating it to be about $120 a year on the average resident for stormwater related costs.
What's the levy amount?
Okay, so when we take a look at the general fund, it's sometimes hard to disaggregate overall costs because what does certain intergovernmental aid go to? What does certain investment income? So, because part of what your transportation aids does indirectly cover is some stormwater stuff. So it's like I can give a high level what it would be per household based off of our projected costs, but actually saying this is the very specific dollar amount that we're levying for, that's an estimate at best.
Okay, what's in our current budget annually dedicated to stormwater?
About 100, that's different.
Yep.
Because that's only one. So because, like I said, there's 5% of our public works technicians that are in, that's actually in a streets and operation budget. So there's a budget area in our operating fund that's about 22,000. And then there's another section of the budget as part of our public work techs that's roughly about 60 to 70,000. And then there's some other operating costs in the financial services costs of about 10 or 15,000 for engineering and miscellaneous costs. So, but I guess I want to re-emphasize this is not apples to apples, because under this model, that does not factor in any debt service payments for improvements. And so once you add that to that cost, I mean, that's where we're talking about the difference there between future improvement and dredging and things that have to be done. Because the debt service payments that are levied for are in the year of the repayment. And so right now our general fund doesn't levy debt service payment. That's in our debt service fund. And so kind of taking a huge step back, we're not changing necessarily the amount of resources or planned approach. It's just funding differently. So we're either funding it with current year debt proceeds and property taxes, and we're going away from debt proceeds and property taxes to a utility charge. So again, we're not changing anything we're doing. It's just where's that money coming from?
A good way that I'm going to try to explain this is in past capital improvement prioritization plans by village board, there has been a standing that I actually got rid of this year, a standing stormwater pond project for $1 million, converting a dry pond to a wet pond to meet TSS and total phosphorus to help our credit system down. That project is continually ranked a D or an F by village board. It's not a priority. No one's seeing the pond, no one sees the TSS, no one sees the total phosphorus. You don't see it, it doesn't really matter. when you look at overall things of what we should prioritize. Creating this utility will allow us to put additional monies every year to be able to do the dredging of the ponds that is needed. The pond based on the stormwater quality plan, Strand looked at 20 ponds and 11 of them need dredging. And that's just 20 of them or 10 of them. I think you looked at 10 maybe. 10 and 8 of them, whatever the number is, it's a high percentage that needs dredging. When you go up to Commerce Park at a high rain or in the middle of the summer, our inlets are actually backed up into the street because that pond is full of sediment. So it's more of a funding mechanism to make sure that we are keeping up with our infrastructure that has unfortunately not been kept up with for the last 20, 25 years since these ponds were created.
So can I just, since we're kind of on this for clarification, kind of at a smaller level. So the 1100 block of North Parkview has a significant stormwater drainage issue that floods the backyards of multiple houses down that row. How to fix that issue for that neighborhood under our current model? How would we fund that whatever we need to do to fix that problem versus a utility?
So right now in our operating budget, I have about $5,000 to address any stormwater issues. That fixes like one inlet on the operating side, not including all of like the Harwins and every other budgetary number that Cameron is going to throw at you for staff and other things, just pure operations. This would be something, there are several locations within the village that have ditches. The backside of North Parkview, up here on Willow that goes into Willow Run Park. There are places that have ditch line that have not been addressed, have not been maintained. It'd be something that we would then plan for through these projects, through this utility. That we would then come up with a plan. These are our priorities. This is what we need to do. How are we going to make it work in the cost that we are putting away?
So
And we can't budget for that outside of this commission.
you'd be taking out debt for those projects. The allowable increase in the levy would not allow you to fit that within the operating budget.
So we literally can't do any stormwater work.
We can do very small, I mean, ultimately, I'm not going to speak on behalf of the board, but from a funding that mechanism perspective, what we've seen, and really what becomes a crutch of this is if the difference is between providing additional resources for police, EMS, or fire, or dredging a pond, the public safety has been prioritized every instance of that over the last decade. And and that's where we completely understand this. And so part of this is, getting the resources to be able to maintain it. Our stormwater infrastructure is relatively new. So we want to make sure that we're keeping up on this before this becomes a huge issue. So like in the example we showed, Shorewood Hills has a $20 ERU rate. And so this can compound very quickly on what you need to actually charge to be able to do all of these projects at once. So what you could do is if the board wanted to eliminate let's just say a public works position because they wanted to fund capital improvement, you could, but then there'd be a corresponding service decrease in those plow operations, things like that. Does that kind of make sense?
I mean, it's all a balance, I guess. Yes, I understand all that. But this is also value or essentially revenue add, and there's no talk of the budget decreasing as you pull in this commission out of essentially the general fund or whatever is being used. I mean, getting to Mike's point as well, is there any negative to making this commission, but making the price instead of $8.90 something much lower, $2 or something? Because I'm still, I didn't get a great answer from you of how much we're actually spending and how much we need to spend. Because you said this will generate $700K. And when Mike asked you how much are we spending right now, why didn't you say $700K? Like, I don't know how that maps, I guess.
Sure.
So I see the need for it, but there's a huge, but the need of revenue, I mean, the cost is high. So maybe, I don't know, can we make it and then keep this cost very low to see how it makes some small improvements? You just said our infrastructure is very new. How much improvements do we need, I guess? Yeah, you guys bring up really good points.
You know,
Yeah.
to answer the question, part of this is it's not apples to apples from a revenue rate recovery, because we're not building in recovery of depreciation in the general fund funding mechanism. So in this method, that's roughly 265,000 of that 700,000. So to answer your question, we spend probably, if you're factoring in debt service and operating, about 400 to 450,000 a year. But that isn't comparable, because if the intent is not to continue down the path that we're on, those debt service payments and things would be dropping off from the general levy. And so we're pulling all of these costs out of, or would be pulling all of these costs out of the general fund, obviously, besides the things that don't exist on the governmental side, which is the 265. So that's where sometimes, and part of the reason why we recommended the Utility Commission to be the oversight board is from a funding perspective, they're used to that kind of budgeting and that kind of management, because that's how they have to look at it from a cash recovery perspective. And so, to your point, if you want to have a $2 a fee, you would not recover. You would not have any money to do the $1 million dredge project and things that would need to be done. So while ultimately you could create this at a much lower rate, it's not really solving the long-term system issues.
Well, then we budget for it with the general fund and we take a hit somewhere else, right? Is that possible? Like we prioritize this if it needs to get done.
And I think this is where you get conflicting with public safety is typically prioritized over things that you don't see. And so this is something that you don't see until there's a flood.
I mean, there's other things in the budget than just public safety, right? I mean, that's for village board to decide,
Yeah.
but I'm just.
If you want to provide a recommendation, but 52% of the budget is public safety. So the increase or the changes outside of that in public works, you're talking about probably 25 to 28% of the budget at most.
So we talked about ERUs for single family. How do we calculate it for commercial, industrial, larger customers that have bigger properties?
Right. So essentially all it is just one ERU is worth 4,065 square feet of impervious area. How much impervious area does Amazon have, or how much impervious area does any of these other ones have?
So anything outside of a single family residential unit is getting calculated based on square footage of impervious
Yes.
that we are measuring
Yep.
and justifying
Yep. Yeah.
every 5 years, or how often? I mean, somebody puts on a major expansion at their plant, does that automatically trigger an update to the ERU stormwater calc, or is it just based on every 5 years when we choose to do a reevaluation of the village?
We would pull the permit. So the building permit would be submitted. We would evaluate, is the current ERU what it should be based off of whatever the recommended improvements are. So like, for example, one of the things that we literally just looked at is Cottage Grove School just created a ton more of impervious surface. So when we first looked at it, that calculation was different than what it is now. So that has already been accounted. And those are the kind of updates that we as staff have to maintain.
This, like we said, I mean, this is gonna get facilities like that, or commercial properties, or properties that don't pay property tax, schools, some of those facilities.
I mean, Drumlin Reserve is a big, a big unit that, again, like just from a fundamental perspective, we want to make sure every property is paying their fair share.
So getting back to just 1 second, Mike, to Nick's comment, because I mean, I think it's a good comment, like, well, what could we do otherwise? Instead of doing the streets projects, this has to come out of public works. I'm just, so you're going to do stormwater projects now, and you're not going to worry about the streets. I think a lot of people do ignore the stormwater side of things. Like, it goes in and then it's just kind of unseen until there's a problem. And then usually when there's a problem, it becomes a big problem faster and faster. You see it in your ditches, all the ponds. You know, we went out, we took sediment in ponds, like 10 of them. 6 of them were at their limit where, you know, the DNR would tell you got to dredge these ponds. They're not actually capturing the sediment like they were supposed to. It's bypassing. The phosphorus is bypassing. It won't get settlement time out. Plus, your volume's gone for big storms. So there'll be a point where the DNR says, you guys don't get credit for any of this anymore. You know, you're not showing that you're actually maintaining any of this. It's not uncommon for communities to kind of forget about stormwater and then come back and start to go, wait a minute, we haven't been budgeting for any of this. We need to start taking care of it. I think there's a little bit of worry on the staff level, like this has been ignored for a while. How do we fit that in? And I think you're right. How do you fit it in? That's the tough spot. Yeah.
Okay, so big round numbers, if we're creating income of 700,000 based on the $8.90 per ERU, and the number you threw out was around 400,000 that we're spending on it right now. We're gaining 300,000 a year that we can accrue and put towards $1 million project. So that to me is what we're generating. This fee is generating in the neighborhood of $300,000 a year to put towards these projects and towards stormwater expenditures. So anything that was stormwater related, i.e. the vac truck, the sweeper, that all would start coming out of this bucket of money. The stormwater utility would be paying for that stuff.
Correct. So you'd see that subsequent reduction, and you hit it right on the head on the additional 265. Really, what makes up that 65,000 a year goes towards saving for the next back truck that needs to be, and 200 of it goes to the other improvements that would need to be done. Or
I have a couple questions. So I guess, have the administrative costs been factored into when I look at the home? Okay, so you're nodding yes. Okay, staff workload and workload on the utility commission, what are the projections there?
So the staff workload, because we already generate utility bills, that impact of the creation of the utility bill, minor. From a review and quality assurance perspective, like running a credit program, that you're probably talking about 20 hours a year management time for what we do, because similar to, we constantly have residents moving, adding meters, subtracting meters. That would just be folded into those monthly. And so for that reason, part of our utility clerk compensation would be allocated to the utility because it's already being allocated to the general fund. So like I had mentioned, 5% for the public works technicians, there would be roughly 2.5% of that person's time allocated to this to represent the administrative burden related to having it be part of the utility bill. Great question. Like some of the other things that are hard to model is there's actually going to be, if this is moved forward, there's actually going to be cost reduction on water and sewer, because now you're separating all the direct utility billing things into 3 instead of 2. So it's like, yes, there's a general fund positive impact, but there's also a water and sewer positive impact. So like, let's just say our billing software is $10,000 a year. Instead of water and sewer being charged $5,000 each, it's now divided into a third. And essentially, yes, you have the same cost overall being on the same bill, but it's not additional cost. The cost is just showing up for the first time in this fund.
So if we're estimating that our public works technicians currently spend 5% of their time on stormwater.
Yep.
What does that equate to? Like how many stormwater inlets or catch basins are being cleaned annually, currently?
So the current time for stormwater is almost inclusively street sweeping. And so to answer your question, when Kyla was mentioning that $5,000 that's currently a direct budget would be, and I don't know if you guys contract that out, but the current, I would say, cadence of the cleaning is not.
We are We have to do inspections per our MS4, for our MS4 permit. Strand helped us out a lot in 2025 doing inspections for us as part of their report, but we do have to inspect, we aim to inspect as many inlets as we can. Again, it's winter, it's summer conditions. If we have a really dry summer like we did several weeks ago, we're able to inspect and clean as many as we can. Again, it also depends on what is happening in the village. I would love to put a number on it, but I don't have a number off the top of my head. But it's something I can look at.
And I would like more information on that because I think that's important in this conversation. And are we using our sewer back truck for this?
Yes, it's also, you can't necessarily get a sewer back truck into the inlet. So a lot of it is pure manpower, bucket, shovel, skid steer, that aspect.
Got it. And I guess my last question is, have we received feedback or have we done outreach to our area businesses? Because in terms of when we're talking about, well, we're going to make the schools pay their fair share. Well, now they have another bill that really, in essence, goes back to tax our taxpayers that they're going to have to fulfill. And obviously, we know that they don't have a ton of money. I think of some of our smaller businesses, let's set Amazon aside, but other businesses through the community that this could pose, a hardship for. And, as a local business, it's already hard, to play with the big guys, if you will, the Amazons of the world, and then we put another fee on them. So I'm concerned about the business aspect, because when I look at those graphs that you guys showed, their fees are going way up.
Yeah, and most of that is driven by most businesses are required to have extensive parking lots. And so that is a direct runoff. And so that's where when we're kind of trying to align, it may be viewed as unfair in year one, but it's more of a realignment to where the cost is actually happening. As for the school district comment, it becomes very difficult in our position. We understand that it's the same taxpayer funding. However, like Monona, for example, already passes these fees on to Monona Grove. So essentially what we're saying there is, okay, well, Monona, we're kind of like subsidizing stormwater costs for Monona residents. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure we're kind of looking at it from a 10,000. To your comment on, I would be very curious. We don't have a ton of businesses, so maybe as part of this implementation would be kind of doing a commercial analysis on some of our medium to small businesses and what really is the difference between an assessment level and a fee charge. I think that's worthwhile doing. I've talked to the chamber about this. I've brought it up in various meetings from a development perspective to different occasions. The problem is until we're ready to kind of move forward and we have a study to point to, all I can say is we're considering this, because then most of the time from a developer perspective and they're saying, well, what's the impact to me? What is the dollar amount to me? And not having this completed until now, I don't have an answer then. And so now that we have that information, this is where we really start kicking that communication and post-implementation communication.
I think, I guess just my feedback or input, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Generally, philosophically, I would like to see us make room in our levy to do these things, and perhaps reduce spending in other areas to be able to do this. So I personally am not prepared to move forward with this tonight.
Any other comments?
I just had one question. So if it's safe to assume that with the parking lot and the redesign of Cottage Grove School, will other nonprofits be impacted the same, like churches and same type sort of fee?
And any tax exempt property would be subject to this charge. So anybody who would be generating that non-pervious area, and that's the tough part about this is, that's not the intent of when you implement something like this, but there is a direct impact on it.
I mean, big round number, so a 1 acre parcel for commercial would be $100 a month. If 1 acre worth of impervious, which is not a lot. I mean, I would say that's similar to an average size small business.
You know, and I really want to point to the comparison. This is not out of, what we're proposing is not out of whack with other communities that are offering this. And so like, if we're kind of looking at like, if what we're proposing is reasonable, that's really what I would look at, is we're clearly not recommending going above and beyond what other communities are doing. We're trying to be somewhere in the middle on how do we provide this service at the most reasonable economic rate.
Any other comments? Otherwise, we can move to 6A, which is the action item. I don't know if anybody has any desire to make a motion.
Well, I think with the minutes that Lisa is hopefully capturing here tonight, the email that was sent out by Kyla on July 6th that had some Q&A, as well as the public feedback forums that were established, I think that would be appropriate to send to the village board for their movement forward.
Okay, did you want to make a recommendation, or did you just want to recommend that they consider it?
I recommend that they consider moving forward,
Okay.
but all the feedback, I think
Yeah.
6A was consider the feedback, and I don't have the public forum feedback. I just have the questions and answers that Kyla sent out on July 6th, and then obviously firsthand knowledge of the discussion here this evening.
Okay, there's a motion to send the feedback to the village board to consider.
I'll second
this.
that.
Cameron, is there anything else you're looking for?
Yes, I guess if I'm a trustee, if we're looking and if we're truly considering, like if we're going to move forward with this, I think some recommendation of the what ERU approach, even if your recommendation ultimately is not to create one, if, you know, having that feedback to the board to consider that, okay, if they ultimately move forward, they would maybe want to know what your preference is from an ERU perspective, as opposed to tier, exact, I don't know what the technical term is.
So to the other committee members, I guess, I think I'm in favor of forming the commission at possibly a tiered rate for residential if the data suggests that there is a difference between high and low. I would strongly recommend a reduced price than this $890 for this initial few years of the commission until we have a 5-year budgeting plan or direct knowledge of how much we are spending or going to spend on this. And I would highly suggest a corresponding decrease, I guess, in the actual general fund to account for this, that there's no new money essentially being taken from residents or costing residents, but it's a balance.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if now's the time for further discussion, but that's my biggest concern is without additional information, I'm struggling with the recommendation because we're based, you know, I don't believe I have substantial information that's justifying the $890 unless you're telling me that that $890 is directly coming off of our current, call it taxes, call it budgeting, call it funding. So that's my apprehension with moving forward.
And we're not setting a dollar amount today, just so we're aware. So that would be a future decision in September, and we can provide this additional information. So because this is a study and this is a kind of a starting point, if I came here and said we want to create this and don't provide a rate, you guys would all look at me like I'm crazy. This is based off of just pulling out what's in our general fund. And again, we would present this very similar to water and sewer. You could see exactly what is making up line by line of this is.
So do we get another say in what the rate is, or once we
The
choose
utility
to pass
commission.
it to the village board, they create it and set a rate?
So the utility commission would approve and adopt a final budget, which in turn would set the ERU rate.
So the only action that the board could take is the creation of it. Once
Yep.
it's created, then it's all up to the utility commission for running it?
Correct.
Okay.
Under the current recommendation.
Okay, so we have a motion in a second. I just want to clarify with the people who made the motion. Did you want to recommend the creation of the stormwater utility? Or was your motion to,
I believe it's the village board's prerogative to do that, and it sounds like the village board is already down that road by conducting the study.
okay. So I think the motion on the table is to recommend to the village board to create a stormwater utility. If I'm wrong, please let me know. We have a motion and a second. And now we're gonna vote. All those in favor? Charlie. Charlie.
Wait.
Oh,
Oh,
do you want to do a roll call? We can do one if you want.
no, you don't, I mean, you don't have to do a roll call. I just wanted to make sure that it was a motion, because I didn't,
Yeah, we got a motion and we got a second. John and Charlie.
okay.
Another question.
Okay, before we vote, you can go for
I'm
it.
sorry, I sit on both commissions. Do I vote twice?
He's asking if he votes twice because he's on the committee and the commission. I
earlier.
I
I didn't even think about
Think-
it being a reality until right now.
I like to have a roll call.
Okay, Charlie's
Roll
requesting
call.
a roll call, so I guess just, I would say Mike's name twice.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. The clerk will call the
So
roll.
maybe don't vote for public or utility commission.
vote for utility
He's-
So you should not have two votes here. So because Public Works needs a quorum, I would recommend voting on Public Works and abstaining from the Utility Commission. That way you don't get two votes worth
Okay.
of power here. Just so I am going to high level summarize this for the village board and strongly encourage that they listen to the meeting because there's a wide variety of feedback here. And I think the full context is important. So I'm going to, at a high level, that this was debated pretty rigorously and that there's not a huge consensus on the dollar amount, which is to be future considered, and post-implementation. Those are things that would need to be worked through.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second, and Lisa, please call the roll.
I'll start with Utility Commission first. Hackle,
I'm sorry, I'm abstaining.
thank you. Rogers,
Yes.
Russell,
Yes.
Stoa,
Yes.
Williams. Yes. All right. Eberhart is absent. Elmore absent. Hackle,
Name.
Hess,
Yes.
Mordini is absent. Severson,
No.
Stoa,
Yes.
thank you.
I'm not quite sure how that works as far as a recommendation, but Utility Commission recommended it and Public Works deadlocked. So I guess technically no recommendation from Public Works. We can move to number 7 on our list here for adjournment of Utility Commission.
I'll make a motion for adjournment of utility commission.
I'll second it.
Motion and a second, non-debatable. All those in favor? Aye.
Yes.
Opposed? Abstain. Okay, Utility Commission is adjourned. Now, it's 6:26, and I recognize, my initial thought was to push stuff to next meeting, but it's the budget, so Kyla, what do you think we should do?
There's a couple, like, we can make this really quick and and then we'll push most of it.
Okay, so let's just go through it. 8 new business Pelletieri today or push?
Today.
Okay,
So there's a memo in the agenda. Are we interested in having additional recycling pickup? It's once every other week right now. Garbage pickup is once every week. Additional e-cycles, is there anything that you guys would like to see addition to coming to the budget next year for Pelletieri services?
I'd like to get a price for weekly recycling.
Okay.
In the past, it hasn't been really financially feasible, but I'd be interested to see what it is. I'm also curious if there's any way to do just like a cardboard drop-off site. Even if it's only certain times of the year, especially around the holidays in the winter, because people get a lot of boxes. If that's something we can do. Otherwise, anybody else have anything?
I would second those.
Awesome. And this is really what we're going to bring forward in a public works memo. So like Kyla's not going to say, I want to do weekly recycling. We're trying to get feedback from you guys to make sure that we're bringing a budget memo that is what you want it to be considered. And so just to remember, this is dollar for dollar a user fee on the tax bill. So whatever we increase it is a directing. This is not levy funded.
Okay.
I would suggest continue the current services as unchanged.
Odds are that's probably what it's going to be, but it's good to get a price, I think. Anything, Mike? Okay. Do you have what you need there for that one?
Yep.
Okay. 8B, discuss recommendation for village board for contracting with Strand Associates.
There was a memo. Did anybody read the memo? Does anybody have any questions about my recommendation to move forward with Strand for the active transportation? If this wants to be a longer conversation, I recommend that we push the
I
topic.
think we should push it.
I think we should push it.
Okay.
Is that what you're going to say too?
No, I was going to recommend going with the lowest
Oh.
bidder.
I,
Not
'cause I
going
have
with
some
Strand.
questions,
But
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. We push to next week.
Okay.
Can we just
Next
make
week?
it?
Next month.
Okay.
Can we just make a note too that it would be good if the agenda item were open to other facilities vendors, because the way I read that is we either up or down vote for Strand, because
Yeah.
it specifically calls Strand out.
Yeah.
And if we were to choose a different vendor, would we be able to the way the meeting
Yeah,
is
probably
noticed?
not. So could we,
Okay,
thank you.
for next month, can we say for
Yep.
contracting for the villages without the company in there?
Yep.
Good call. All right, then we will postpone that unless there's any objections to next month. Go to C, discuss recommendation to the village board, the hydrate easement agreement for the DNR trailhead lighting project.
We are doing 5 street lights, decorative lights in the DNR trailhead. This is the easement that lets us put the 5 lights and the electrical conduit around the parking lot to be able to do that. It's Hydrite's land, DNR has an easement, everything's in MOU.
Okay, and I'm just gonna skip right to consider. Does anybody have a motion for that?
I'll make a motion to approve moving forward with that easement.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Otherwise, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Move to D, discuss residential traffic concern and traffic calming
Skip.
policy and request application.
We'll talk about that next.
Talk about that next time. Does anybody have any objections to that? All right, number 9, directors and engineering report.
Please read the memo since the meeting is pretty much, we need to continue moving on. The biggest thing that I want to discuss is that there's going to be a department requesting an additional position for 2027 that's going to be shared between Public Works, Water, and Sewer, potentially Storm Sewer, depending on budgeting. And then September budget meeting is planned to be pushed 1 week to September 16th at 6 o'clock to allow for additional time for the creation of said budgets. And Public Works will be at 6 o'clock, Utility will be at 5 o'clock. This way we hopefully don't have any run-ins with additional meetings, and Plan Commission won't be after us. Everything else, if there's any questions in the memo, Chris will ask those questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, we can move to future agenda items. So we've got active transportation plan, traffic calming policy, anything else? Budget?
Can we talk about the drainage issue in the 1100 block in North Parkview, please?
Yes. Anything else? Otherwise, we can move to number 11.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second, non-debatable. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Public Works is adjourned.